Hey, look.
Hey.
Are you into really old British wrestlers?
Yeah, it turns out, yes, I am.
Well, you have come to the right place.
Good.
Because it's the only place. No one else is interested apart from us.
Yay!
Unhealthily so. Today, we're going to be talking. I mean, a lot of people have now been giving, can you do? Can you do Adrian
do
Street?
Yeah.
Can you do Leon Harris? Can you do Crybaby Jim Breaks? Yeah, we can. And we will.
Yeah.
But we're taking a little bit of a swerve this week because we're going for someone who, big star in his day, not really talked about anymore. And that is Brian Goldbelt MAXINE.
That's our sweet spot.
Very much so.
Men who look like our most beloved of references, the Yorkshire Ripper.
He's got a look of a lot of different people. He's like Terry Scott from Terry and June, if he'd had an accident with a tree.
Bernard Bresslaw, is like that kind of guy?
He could be the young son of Sid James, who came to public attention because of a diamond theft. He's got vibes of Johnny Vaughan's older uncle who was trouble in his day.
If his name was Toby Carvery, I would not be surprised. He looks like a butcher. He looks like a butcher, Mark.
He does. You can also, he's Toby Carvery and Toby Jug.
Yes.
Both of those things, also from that period as well. Brian MAXINE, he was a guy from Ellesmere Port in Cheshire, in England. You can tell that I've just taken that off Wikipedia. It's got the word England in it. He debuted in 1962 and he retired in 2008. So he had a 46-year career. What's really interesting about Brian MAXINE is, I think to some degree, people don't talk about him when they're talking about great wrestlers. But what Brian MAXINE is a really, really important pioneer of British wrestling. And he was a pioneer because he was the master of self-promotion.
Right.
And nobody in 1960s Britain did anything other than just go, I've put my trunks on, I'll now go out there and give them the razzle-dazzle.
Yeah.
And then I will be like all 200 other performers, exactly like me, indistinguishable apart from the colour of our trunks. Brian MAXINE is fascinating because Brian MAXINE's 5'5" to 5'7", no one's quite sure, so quite small. He only weighed 12 stone, which again, he doesn't look 12 stone.
I weigh 12 stone.
I know. Look at us, fat, lazy, modern men. He was a boxer at school. I don't know if you knew he had a boxing background.
No, I couldn't tell from looking at his fucking nose.
He later had a boxing career during his national service.
Right.
And he was one of the Eastern Championship winners in Singapore.
Singapore.
A rough old
good
time.
God, that's Singapore at that time. Wowzers.
Yeah.
Wowzers.
He comes back with what I would say are Singapore British Army tattoos. He's got some sort of like elaborate stuff on his shoulders.
Lordy.
Clearly done on a ship in the boiling heat. He returns to Britain and he decides war is not enough. I must now work in the fairground booths doing boxing against all comers at Ellesmere Port Fairgrounds.
I mean, to say he's hard, he's taking on all comers at a fair.
Yeah.
Any old maniac who would come down and have
what
a go.
you can tell from the way he looks is that sometimes these people manage to get to him. He has a nose that is as flattened as a human nose can be. There is nothing like above the tip.
No,
it has just been pounded flat.
There's nothing that is coming out or going into that.
No, it looks like if you've got a teaspoon and you put the handle on the middle of your forehead and let the spoon just go down.
Yeah.
If you imagine there was no nose and it was like spray painted pink,
that's
is
what
Brian
his nose looks
MAXINE's
like,
nose. Astonishing looking. He gets into wrestling in 1962. He takes part in a lot of sort of independent wrestling organisations and he's never pegged for success, particularly. He's seen as just being almost like a run-of-the-mill tough guy. And in 65, he appears on World of Sport for the first time. Joint promotions bring him in. And they just use him against Mick McMahon. Mick McMahon beats him handily. No point does anyone go, this guy is going to have a 40-year career at the top of British wrestling bills. It all starts in 1969. And he wins the British Welterweight Championship from a guy who was called Alan Sargent. He wins that at Croydon's Fairfield Halls. And most wrestling pundits thought, well, he'll hold it for a bit. Titles did change hands. It wasn't a big thing. It wasn't a thing that they were going, you're going to be a big star. It was just a way to freshen people up. But the next day after that title change, Brian MAXINE's metamorphosis begins. What happens with Brian MAXINE is Brian MAXINE gets the belt, and it's only supposed to be short. But what he does is he uses so much new stuff that's never been seen before in Britain. Joint decide we're not going to take the belt off him. And in fact, what they end up doing is giving him a second belt. So it starts off, he starts wearing a crown made out of shiny card that he's made clearly on a kitchen table. He hands out signed business cards as he comes to the ring, and they read on them, a souvenir of the night you saw the champion in action.
It doesn't take much, does it?
Underneath, keep this. It will become a collector's item. He also puts up posters around the venues before he's performing there that say this man is wanted in every wrestling venue. Description: fast, powerful, dangerous. Peculiarities: always seen wearing his gold belt. His crime: destroying all his opponents. Alias GOLDBELT MAXINE. What's brilliant about it is everybody goes, you're a big head. And in Britain, that's not a good thing.
No.
And so everyone is riled by Brian MAXINE just being full of himself. They want to see him get beaten. And the promoters look at it and go, this could run and run. Is he the first king of wrestling is one of the questions, because he is the first person to call himself the king of the ring.
Right.
A real shame that he didn't trademark that. It could have been a very different career.
Yeah.
Is he the first king in wrestling? Probably not. There was a performer called King Curtis Iakea, who was, his father had been a royal chamberlain to the Hawaiian royal family, and he had called himself Prince Iakea for a number of years, and he certainly called himself the king around 1966. But King Curtis Iakea just used the name. He didn't wear a crown. Brian MAXINE does seem to be the first wrestler
who cosplayed as a king,
who wears an actual king's crown.
Right.
He made it himself.
You can tell.
He is wrestling's first king, Brian MAXINE. For Brian MAXINE, that's not enough. He's like, well, that's obviously a world-changing gimmick. It's time to do a better one. And what he does is he gives himself the nickname Gold Belt. And what his gimmick is he had a gold belt. And so when he got the belt, he's like, my gimmick is now I have the belt. And they're like, okay, so we've got to keep the belt on you.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, the gimmick is going so well.
So to ruin this gimmick?
He very cleverly made it part of his act that he was all about this title. Kent Walton wrote a top 50 guide to wrestlers for the TV Times. And in Brian MAXINE's entry, he wrote, a superstitious wrestler, he will not enter the ring unless wearing the championship belt, hence the nickname. So GOLDBELT MAXINE holds on to that title for 2 years before he wins the British middleweight belt as well. And he was the first wrestler to simultaneously hold titles in both divisions. Now, when he had that was, an astonishing achievement. He then lost the first belt that he'd won, but he kept the middleweight one. And very soon they said, well, we're going to make that inactive. There's too many belts. And so he went, well, here's the thing. Why don't you just let me keep it?
Yeah.
And he kept that belt on for the next 40 years. Astonishing.
He just had the belt.
By the time we get to the mid-70s, he is a very, very big star. He had the leading British fan club in 1978. The American magazine, The Ring, they talked about how good his fan club was. They said for $1 yearly, MAXINE fans receive photographs and a biography of Brian, regular newsletters, and a personally signed Christmas and birthday card. So good. So Brian MAXINE, out of all the wrestlers, was all about self-promotion. And one of the things that I've got as a collector of wrestling memorabilia, if I buy a big load of stuff, I can guarantee there will be 2 or 3 signed Brian GOLDBELT MAXINE pictures in there, because it seems like he brought a sack of pictures to everything he did, and everyone was signed. He started trying to do more promotion that was outside wrestling. So at some point, his middleweight belt was stolen from the dressing room, and it was featured on Police 5 with Shaw Taylor, which were 5-minute long, a sort of proto-crime watch. And they did a big piece about Brian MAXINE having his belt stolen.
Nice.
Who knows if that was kosher? It was never recovered. And so Brian MAXINE took the opportunity to have a new belt made that was personalised. Staying in his wrestling career, in October 1988, he made his last World of Sport appearance on television. And he'd been on about 40 times. So he was a very, very big name and was probably known as a household name. People would, I imagine, if you said, oh, she's got a gold belt on, someone would go, who do you think she is? GOLDBELT MAXINE, that would have been the level of fame he was at. My favourite thing is in 1991, Brian MAXINE became a WWF superstar. 52 years old. He takes part in the dark match of the UK show Battle Royal at the Royal Albert Hall, taking on a young guy called Steve Regal. In Regal's autobiography, Walking a Golden Mile, he remembered that night. Just as I was wondering who I would be wrestling, I bumped into an old buddy, Wayne Bridges, who was with another wrestler, Brian MAXINE. MAXINE. He used to wrestle as Brian GOLDBELT MAXINE, and the two of us were on first. It was my first time in the Albert Hall, which was an incredible building, a massive circular structure with an ornate exterior. Citation needed. And one of London's biggest venues. The night was a complete sellout, and I was very nervous. But Brian made me look like $1 million, and I've always thanked him for that. Without Brian MAXINE, Steve Regal may have had a bad match and it could have all been different.
Yeah.
Brian MAXINE talked about his long career. He said, I never retired. The gaps between bookings just got longer. And from the last decade of his career, which was through the 1990s and the 2000s, he mainly did take on fellow World of Sport veterans, people like Steve Gray and Johnny Kidd and Mal Sanders. And his penultimate match from 2007 is up on YouTube. It's against Johnny Kidd and it takes place at a sort of wrestling legend. And by this point, you know, he is an elderly man and he can still go. You never forget it. I was so bowled over by the fact that he did this for so long and you can see him still able to go. And I thought, you know, fantastic. And what's even better is for the first time as someone that we've done when we've done a little career retrospective, and Brian MAXINE is still around.
Yeah,
he is still going.
I did wonder.
He was born in 1938. That would make him 85, 86 now. And so, you know, for the first time, here are your flowers, GOLDBELT MAXINE. It's a delight to know that he's out there and that someone might say to him, you'll never guess what, right? They'll say, on a YouTube, and he'll go, hey, what? And they'll go...
What they say about me nose?
One last fucking match. And this time, I'm gonna take a spade. I'm going to fucking leather him. I mean, look, at 85, I have absolutely no doubt he would paste the both of us.
Oh, definitely.
Absolutely slatter us. Right? But look, that's not the whole Brian MAXINE story. There is a little extra coda, which is magic. In 1972, he began making country and western music.
Of course he did.
His first album, Brian MAXINE, King of the Ring, it came out in 1972 on the Starr label, which was a budget subsidiary of EMI. Most of the copies that you see have a 99p sticker on them. That's how much it was. He covers on the album songs by Chris Christopherson, Waylon Jennings, The Loving Spoonful, and Johnny Cash. And for reasons that no one understands, right? This country and western album has the uber successful folk rock band Fairport Convention working as his backing musicians. So you've got the folk legend Dave Swarbrick on a fiddle and mandolin, and you've got Dave Pegg from Fairport playing bass. In 1975, he releases his second album, Ribbons of Stainless Steel, and for reasons that no one understands, all of Fairport Convention are on this album, including Sandy Denny doing backing vocals.
He's lured them all in.
He got them all in. It was recorded at Abbey Road.
Jesus Christ. Sandy Denny's on backing vocals as well. Like, she's all those talented women in fucking rock music.
And it means it's his most valuable album. The funniest thing about it is Fairport Convention adored Brian MAXINE, and they had him as their special guest on their tour in 1975.
So I think I saw a clip of this.
An old friend of ours, Brian MAXINE, who's a British middleweight wrestling champion.
In the 80s, he transitions a bit. British wrestling is changing. He starts becoming effectively a character actor. So he appears in an advert for Harp Lager in the magazines, in the sort of still ads. He has small roles in The Bill. He's on the first ever Kenny Everett video show. And he plays one of the sort of background small extra characters in Roman Polanski's 1986 movie Pirates, which is a box office disaster. But just when you're sort of like, okay, fair enough. In 1983, he is involved with the Broadway musical flop Teaneck Tansy, The Venus Flytrap, which was about women wrestlers.
Right.
And as part of that, he trained Debbie Harry from Blondie to wrestle. And in her 2019 memoir, Face It, she talks about Brian MAXINE. She says, we had a wrestling coach named Brian MAXINE who had a massive muscular no-neck upper body and a perfectly busted up nose. Brian had been a British champion for years and he was very serious about his job as a coach. For weeks, he taught us how to do the holds, make the jumps, take the falls, and do all the different wrestling moves that we did in the show. I loved getting my fat ass thumped all over the stage. That's probably how I ruined my back. It turns out pro wrestling's a tough sport, and it's not the best thing in the world for your body.
I had no idea.
Brian MAXINE becomes one of those guys, like a Lord Alfred Hayes, who is like a Zelig. And you would meet him, and you would go, oh, he looks like he's had a tough life. And he'd go, Yeah, I mean, I did record an album at Abbey Road. And you go, right, okay. And you go, did spend 7 weeks working with Debbie Harry, teaching her how to wrestle. You go, okay, this is impressive. And he would go, and before that, I was probably one of the most successful heels in the history of British wrestling. Brian MAXINE deserves every single one of the flowers we can do. So